I just finished up my AD&D 2nd Edition game with my boys, and I thought, what better time than now to talk about the alternatives to WotC D&D. For those of you that are familiar with my channel, you will know that I'm not a huge fan of Wizards of the Coast. Probably equally as obvious, when I looked into the changes that have been added into the newest edition, I was not enthusiastic about D&D 24. From the even more super heroic heroes of the already deity level characters from the standard 5th edition to the idea that a halfling and a half-orc are equally strong as one another, I've not found any changes to the core rules that really make it a good option for me. But that's okay, because I have numerous better options that I'm going to share with you today. So if you don't think players should be quaffing 8-ounce potions as a bonus action while fighting off enemies,
You get up!
enemies that can no longer be considered monsters because it could offend any actual orcs, goblins, or dragons that might be listening, then join me as I discuss 10 better fantasy alternatives to WotC D&D. Keep in mind that this list is in no particular order, as the variation between systems is wide enough that the majority of players will disagree on where to place them. So that's just why we're going to focus on why they are a great option. I did limit this list to in-print and available options, so if you wonder why I didn't add some of my out-of-print favorites, that would be the reason. So without any further ado, Dragonbane. Dragonbane is a Free League Publishing remake of an earlier Swedish RPG translated as Dragons and Demons. Dragonbane uses familiar terms and statistics while turning expectations on their head with a simple roll-under resolution mechanic. What sets Dragonbane apart from D&D? Number 1. Simple but deep gameplay. Dragonbane combines simple character creation, easy roll-under mechanics, and familiar terminology with a plethora of heroic abilities, skill, and gear to give a great total package that can all be taught in less than 30 minutes. Number 2, great solo and co-op. If you get the starter box, which why wouldn't you, the game comes with a fully realized solo and co-op game system with content generation tools and a simple but effective oracle. I've played several sessions and have found this solo game to be tough but engaging and have never had a session which wasn't fun. Number 3, the best starting package, full stop. Dragonbane seems to have forgotten that it is no longer 1985 because they provided a starter box that really made me feel like I was getting an old TSR product in a good way. This box is crammed full with full rules, an adventure, a solo play guide, maps, standees, dice, cards, and more. At this price point, I don't think I'm being hyperbolic to call this the best starter set in gaming today. Shadowdark. Ah, Shadowdark. Everything about this game was begging me to dislike it. It was touting its appeal to 5e players, the swell of community build-up was impossibly high, and it was part of an ambitious crowdfunding campaign. To top that off, it hit at just the right time when people were so eager to find the next big thing to get away from WotC. So I waited, I skulked, and I observed from a distance. The more I found out, the more I wanted to know. Once the Arcane Library and their head sorceress Kelsey Dion put the pre-order option on the website, I had to have my own copy.
Precious!
What's more, once I read and played my copy, I ended up ordering everything else that she had on the website. What sets Shadowdark apart from D&D? Number 1, familiar innovation. This is not a D&D clone, but the use of familiar class names, attributes, game terms, and monsters will make players of any edition of D&D feel right at home. The game takes familiar concepts and spins them just enough to make them fresh. Classes, as an example, are limited to the 4 traditional: fighter, priest, thief, and wizard. While you may think that seems short on options, consider that the class talents and other choices, like weapon mastery for the fighter, for example, will ensure that there is a wide range within each category, rife for roleplay. The game is full of little twists on the unexpected like this, and it makes for a very enjoyable learning experience. Number 2, streamlined gameplay. The game itself plays like a combination of Mor Borg and Dungeon Crawl Classics with a pit stop at the White Box D&D. With flat math, low hit points, and gritty death mechanics, you might think that the game lacked depth. But it manages to fit in tons of great flavorful elements like spell mishaps, luck mechanics, intuitive dungeon delving mechanics, and an extremely innovative take on the torch mechanic. Of my GaryCon experience, my session of Shadowdark was easily the high point. Number 3, fast play. Speaking of that session at GaryCon, I played in a group of 6, of which I was the only one, aside from the GM, to have read the full rules. Despite that, we were able to jam a meaningful and entertaining game session into under an hour, with enough room for witty banter in between. If a game is judged by the reaction of its players, then this was a resounding endorsement. Nave, 2nd edition. Ben Milton's Ode to the OSR. This book only recently shipped to backers, but boy did they get a treat when they cracked these pages. At an affordable price point, Nave 2nd Edition offers that rare blend of game system and system-neutral resource toolkit for every GM. But what sets it apart from D&D? Number 1, Rules Light. Where Shadowdark, Mor Borg, and others are decidedly streamlined, I would place Nave in an entire other category, being Rules Light. The full book is around 80 pages. You could honestly play this system with just the end pages. 4 pages would cover enough to run a full session. There are plenty of games that attempt to go rules light, but Nave really succeeds where most fail. Number 2, compatibility. Ben cleverly created a largely new system while utilizing an existing and hugely supported set of statistics. The effect of this ambitious design choice is that while the game plays differently than those early editions of D&D, you can still use anything from the resources therein. Monsters, adventures, traps, and magical items are all easily ported into Nave with only a cursory evaluation. That makes this game the rules light equivalent of a gaming Rosetta Stone. Number 3, the GM's best friend. This book is chock full of generation tools. If one were to tear out the pages related to the actual game system and leave what was remaining for purchase, you'd probably still have the single greatest boon to game masters of the last decade. If you have a need, there is a generation tool in this book. What's more, many of the tools are nested into the other tools, creating some incredibly unique and weird results. I just can't say enough here. Old School Essentials. Gavin Norman and the folks at Necrotic Gnome took what was once a niche product with their BX Essentials pamphlets and turned it into an old school powerhouse with some of the finest production values and product support in the gaming industry. While most of what is here is rehashing of old material, it is the execution where OSE really shines. What sets Old School Essentials apart from D&D? Number 1, layout. Gavin Norman should honestly teach lessons in game layout. I have been playing BXD&D since the mid-80s, and I had no idea that such an elegant game was lying beneath the clutter, typos, and general overhead to learning and playing from the original books. With the rules tome, Norman created the definitive version of BXD&D without adding or changing the rules in any meaningful way. Number 2, nostalgia. Due to the fidelity to the original game, OSE will instantly have a nostalgia reaction from grognards coming back from a long gaming hiatus. They will instantly feel like this is the game that they were playing as a child and be right at home. But truthfully, it is in reality better than what they remember, as it had been tidied up and presented to a different and more experienced audience. Number 3, library. OSE has the benefit of the single largest collection of RPG materials of any modern system. Any TSR-era D&D products can easily be used with OSE, virtually just the same as they would have been 40 years ago. On top of that, the folks at Necrotic Gnome have been creating mounds of new material, which cover everything from BXifying the content from AD&D and Unearthed Arcana to exploring new worlds via their excellent modules. You will never run out of options with OSE. Pathfinder for Savage Worlds. I just finished up my 2.5-year journey through the Abomination Vaults in Pathfinder 2nd Edition with my players, and it left me with one feeling: exhaustion. While I like the aesthetics of Pathfinder, mechanically it is bloated to the point that anything beyond 5th level becomes a chore for the Game Master to manage, in my humble opinion. Luckily, the folks at Pinnacle Entertainment Group heard my call out in the darkness and gave me a dream team of the Savage World mechanics with the options and aesthetics from Pathfinder. If it means anything about how highly I think of this game, our group, upon completing the Pathfinder 2nd Edition campaign, immediately transitioned to a Savage Pathfinder game for the foreseeable future. But what sets Savage Pathfinder apart from D&D? Number 1, flexibility. Number 1, flexibility. When I've fumbled through my Suede and Savage Pathfinder books, I have been able to create literally any concept I have dreamed up, all within the confines of the existing rule set without the need for homebrew house rules. With a thorough understanding of these rules and how powers and trappings work, you can essentially run any game in this system. Number 2, this game has stakes. This won't be for everyone, but in my mind, the lack of hit points and the mostly bounded wound threshold of 3 leaves you with a deliciously high-stakes game. With exploding dice and the possibility of death on a crit fail of the injury table, your players should always think twice before wading into a group of 100 enemies, no matter how many advancements they've taken. Number 3, Toolkit. Savage Worlds has such a great toolkit of optional setting rules, gear, races, and edges across its product line that you might think that it would be a nightmare to GM, but you'd be wrong. The game has a certain theory behind all of its mechanics, and once you get used to it, remembering how the various different mechanics interact is a breeze. When you throw in the numerous different player aids available online, you have a game that plays very smoothly at the table. Worlds without number. The balance between options and simplicity is a constant push and pull in any game design. Often the games with creation tools we love end up being the games that are frustratingly complicated to adjudicate at the table. Kevin Crawford of Sine Nomine has really hit a sweet spot with his Without Number series. This book takes the BX core, adds a nuanced character creation design process, and then streamlines the monsters for a beautiful package. What sets Worlds Without Number apart from D&D? Well, for starters, number 1, it's free. There are other free RPGs, with versions of Labyrinth Lord, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, and Basic Fantasy all being popular examples. Where Worlds Without Number sets itself apart is in its vastness and completeness. The free versions of Crawford's game have all of the good bits that the premium versions have, and that says a lot because there's a lot there. Number 2, world building. Speaking of the mountains of material in Worlds Without Number, the world-building tools are a great place to start, as they encompass every aspect of a campaign that a burgeoning GM would need to explore. From settlements to enemies to wilderness ecologies and the inner workings of factions across the realm, Crawford provides the tools to do it yourself. Absolute best in class. Number 3, skill system. Lots of games have a skill system built in, but not many have the strength of the one used in Worlds Without Number. Opting to ditch the expected D20 roll mechanic, Kevin uses a 2d6 method lifted from Traveller, which provides a parabolic curve rather than the straight, giving the math a shot in the arm that makes small bonuses extremely relevant to being successful at execution of skill rolls. Crown and Skull. Hanker and Farinell. You've gone into your lab and brought me so many great and innovative concepts to introduce to my own games, but for me, this is your best. Crown and Skull ditches the tropes of traditional RPG design, opting for an attrition system that pairs beautifully with the grim and mysterious setting that was included with the game. But what sets Crown and Skull apart from D&D? Number 1, unusual design. As I mentioned before, the attrition system allows you to use resources from items to skills as your hit points, which weaves a narrative of its own as you lose said resources during combat. Other innovations include no-to-hit rolls, just rolling damage, as well as having all rolls player-facing. You'll find yourself scratching your head as you read the rules, but trust me, they work. Number 2, mechanical role-playing cues. As I mentioned, as a result of some of the interesting mechanical choices, narratives will naturally emerge from results. Like when our warrior lost their helm during a fight with a beastie. The player described the scene as throwing the helmet to the ground to be able to get a better look at the angle that it was approaching from. The whole system subtly drags players into deeper role-playing waters than they are accustomed, and it's great. Number 3, gritty. Because every wound is also another resource that you won't have access to, the outlook can get grim quickly. When you couple that with the fact that there really isn't an expectation of a base roll, and you know that you are literally running out of options as you get beaten and battered during a game, the game can feel wonderfully grim. Dungeon Crawl Classics. What can I say about DCC that hasn't been said? Heck, what can I even say about DCC that I haven't already said on this channel? Well, probably not much, so I'm just going to cover some of the high points of this Appendix N inspired take on Trimmed Down 3.0 Shell and tell you what sets DCC apart from D&D. Number 1, the funnel. Okay, if you've never played or ran a funnel, you will be hard-pressed to understand this concept, but bear with me. You take 15 to 20 random peasants and vagrants and throw them into an old-school adventure meat grinder, and anything that comes out alive on the other end is the little sausage that will be a level 1 hero in your next DCC game. The players will typically lose 80% or more of their characters, of which they will each run 4 to 5. And they'll learn quickly that the world is cruel and not balanced. They will also become adept at making wise decisions that don't rely on character sheets with great stats. Number 2. Weird dice. When Gary and Dave decided that 6 sides weren't enough, they were pleasantly surprised to find their solutions in a teacher's supply catalog, leading to our standard 6 polyhedral mix. Mr. Goodman over at Goodman Games decided we needed more, and it was a fantastic decision. Adding the stranger Zoki dice, like the D14, D16, and D24, and others, creates that same sense of wonder that we had the first time we saw D20. At the table, it also adds some granularity, leading to the dice chain, whereby dice can be upgraded or downgraded along the path from D3 to D30. It's every bit a game changer as the advantage-disadvantage mechanic. Number 3. Magical magic. The standard spell write-up for most D&D clones is a paragraph or so, with a small block of particulars. DCC spell write-ups, on the other hand, have huge 2-page spreads with different results for every possible roll. Throw in that you can sacrifice physical attributes to improve a roll, and you end up with some truly epic results. We'll put it this way. In how many games could a single well-cast first-level spell result in the destruction of an entire town? Well, that's DCC for you, and I love it. Hyperborea. When I first heard about Hyperborea, or as it was then known, the astonishing swordsmen and sorcerers of Hyperborea, I was listening to Old Man Grognard discuss the old box set. My, how that one video changed my gaming life. Jeff Talanian and his company, Northwind Games, has taken the very best parts of AD&D, BXD&D, and his own home-table brewed class innovations to create the most playable version of AD&D system to date. It is familiar enough to be compatible, but different enough to see the improvements every session. But what sets Hyperborea apart from D&D? Number 1. The setting. The world itself is a combination of Howard Lovecrafted Smith with elements of civilization from our own history and fiction dropped onto a flat world with danger lurking around every corner. The modules do a lot of the fleshing out of the world, though the new referee manual has a great gazetteer as well. Since many of the modules are directly based upon the Conan or Cthulhu stories, you'll find plenty of familiar fantasy and sci-fi tropes throughout Hyperborea. Number 2. The classes. With 26 total classes between the 4 core and all of their subclasses, the variety here is vast. Many of the character classes clearly are amalgamations of other classes, but several are also obvious odes to tropes of fiction. The greatest compliment that I can pay to the system that Jeff has developed here is that even with all of the options available, the core classes remain eminently playable in their own right. Best class options of any core rule set. Number 3. Weird monsters. With all of the Lovecraftian horrors that you would want, along with all of the old favorites, you might think that pretty much sums up the Hyperborean bestiary. But there is still some great nuance in the margins. A lot of the classics have a very different take from your standard fantasy, with orcs, for example, being a picked demon half-breed, or dwarves being evil worms of the earth. There are plenty of surprises throughout. Whether you need the Lost World style dinos or the Innsmouth fishmen, this system has more weird beasties than you can shake a shoggoth at. Mor Borg. Oh, Mor Borg. how my love-hate relationship with you has developed over time. This is the only game on this list that I've not done a complete, separate, dedicated deep dive review of. And even then, I did reviews of not one, but two of its variant versions, with Pirate Borg and, more recently, Frontier Scum. While I still don't feel completely comfortable with some of the imagery chosen for the game, there is no denying that this is a brilliantly crafted and designed product. But what sets Mor Borg apart from D&D? Number 1, deadly. Mor Borg isn't just deadly for the players. The entire world is a ticking time bomb with a mechanically driven endpoint that sees the end of the world. The players aren't going to be looking to become epic level adventurers or spend their later years building keeps and castles. The players are going to be looking to eke out another day or two in the miserable existence of a dying world and deal with the other desperate souls trying to do the same. So basically similar to Chicago if you've ever been there. Number 2, chaotic. There is a great randomness to Mor Borg that permeates the whole game. While the gameplay itself is a simple D20 target number system with bounded math, the character creation, dungeon creation, monster generators, and everything else about the game is so wildly unpredictable that it just encourages players and GMs to sit back and enjoy the short ride that will always end in a gruesome demise. Number 3, expandable. Between the many different variant versions of the game, which span the realms of sci-fi, cyberpunk, Old West, pirates, and more, and the numerous pamphlet-style game expansions, Mor Borg rivals 2nd edition D&D for the volume of product released in a short time frame. I have several different releases for the game, including the nearly obligatory Feretory, but by far my favorite release is Solitary Defilement, which turns Mor Borg into a nightmarish solo-playing RPG with inspiration clearly taken from Sean Tompkins' Ironsworn system. Whatever you want to do with Mor Borg, chances are there is a release for it. There you have it, 10 amazing fantasy RPG alternatives that aren't WotC D&D for you and your table. Now, even though these don't have the D&D logo, they're going to play a lot more like the D&D you remember, most likely. So if you've enjoyed these different games that I've talked about today and you want to hear more about them, go check out my channel. There's a lot more videos related to almost all of these on the channel. So until next time, happy Independence Day, good gaming and God bless. Thanks for watching.